What the Study Says.
Welcome back to What's the Study Says. I'm Dr. Kai.
And I'm Dr. May.
Today, we're diving into something you hear about constantly, right? Intermittent fasting. That whole idea of skipping meals, eating only in a specific window, is it really the secret key to weight loss?
Or is it maybe just a practical way to end up eating fewer calories overall? That's the big question.
Exactly. Because the buzz is huge. Every app gets touted for everything, effortless weight loss, amazing health benefits. But what does the actual science say when you dig into it?
Well, that's what our deep dive is all about today, Dr. Kai. We're looking closely at the science behind intermittent fasting, IF, and comparing it to, well, the classic approach, caloric restriction, or CR.
Right. We're asking, if you eat the same number of calories, does when you eat them actually make IF better for weight loss or health? Or is it just about the total amount?
Precisely. And we've got some really solid research to unpack systematic reviews, meta-analyses, some big randomized trials.
Our mission, then, is to sift through this pile of evidence and figure out what the most rigorous, up-to-date science tells us, especially when calories are matched. Let's cut through the hype.
Let's do it.
Okay, so, Dr. May, before we jump into the studies themselves, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly is intermittent fasting versus caloric restriction? People sometimes mix them up.
That's a great starting point. They are distinct. So caloric restriction, CR, that's the traditional method, you simply aim to eat fewer calories each day than you normally would.
Like cutting back by, say, 500 calories a day, something like that.
Exactly. Maybe reducing intake by 20%, maybe 40%. It's purely focused on the total amount of energy you consume. It's been the standard advice for a long time.
Okay, standard calorie counting and reduction. Got it. And IF.
Intermittent fasting is different. It structures when you eat. It involves cycling between periods of eating and periods of voluntary fasting.
So like the 168 method people talk about. Fast for 16 hours, eat within an 8-hour window.
That's a really popular one, yeah. Or you might see the 5.2 method, eat normally 5 days a week, then drastically cut calories on 2 days. So IF is primarily about the timing of your food intake, not necessarily the total amount, though often that gets reduced too.
Okay, so CR is how much, IF is when. And the core question these studies tackle is, if we make the how much identical for both groups, does the when still provide extra benefits?
That is exactly the crux of it, because, a lot of earlier studies didn't properly control for calories. People on IF might have just naturally eaten less because their eating window was shorter.
Right, fewer opportunities to snack, maybe.
Potentially. So the key here in the research we're looking at today is the focus on isocaloric comparisons. That means both the IF group and the CR group were consuming the same number of calories.
That's crucial. That way you can actually see if the fasting period itself is doing something special, metabolically speaking, beyond just cutting calories.
Precisely. It isolates the timing factor.
All right, so with that isocaloric principle in mind, let's dive into the evidence. What's the first big study you looked at?
Let's start with a really comprehensive one. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis by Hamsho and colleagues, published just this year, 2025. They pooled data from 20 randomized controlled trials.
Wow, 20 trials.
Yeah, how many people total?
Over 1,700 participants, so it's a really robust analysis, bringing together a lot of data, and its specific goal was comparing isocaloric IF and CR.
Okay, the gold standard kind of review. What was the main headline finding?
The big takeaway. They concluded that IFs can be an effective alternative to CR for health improvements, but it's generally not superior when calories are matched.
Not superior. Okay, so maybe not the magic bullet people hope for, just another tool in the toolbox.
That seems to be the message. It works, but likely because it helps reduce calories, same as CR. Now let's look at the specifics, like body composition.
Yeah, what about weight, fat loss, that kind of thing? Okay, so in the short term, looking at studies up to 3 months, the IF groups did show a small, statistically significant reduction in fat mass, about 1 kilogram, or 2.2 pounds, more than CR.
Okay. A slight edge for fat loss initially.
A slight edge, yeah. But interestingly, there were no significant differences in overall body weight, BMI, lean body mass, that's muscle or waist circumference, compared to the CR group in that short term.
So a bit specific, just the fat mass. What about longer term? Did that advantage hold up?
Looking longer term, around 10 to 12 months, the IF groups did show slightly greater reductions in fat mass percentage and waist circumference compared to CR.
So waistline improvement in the long run. That's interesting.
It is. But again, no significant differences in overall body weight, BMI, or crucially lean body mass. The researchers did mention some inconsistencies, though.
Inconsistencies how?
Well, they noted a trend towards more weight loss overall in IF, but more BMI reduction in CR. But they thought this might be due to just having fewer studies measuring those specific things long term. They also hinted that maybe, just maybe, in some studies, the IF groups might have slightly underreported their calorie intake.
The difficulty of tracking calories perfectly in studies.
Exactly. And maybe a touch of that expectation bias we'll talk more about later. People thinking IF works better might subtly eat less.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the experience of being on these diets, like adherence, hunger levels,
Yeah.
things that matter for sticking with it?
Really important points for real-world use. Adherence actually varied depending on the type of IF. The 5.2 and the 168 TRE methods seem to have higher adherence than traditional CR.
So people found those easier to stick to.
Apparently so in some studies. But interestingly, another pattern, 14.2 on TRE, had lower adherence than CR, so it's not universal.
Okay. And hunger, fatigue, that's often a big complaint with dieting.
This was quite striking. The CR groups, the ones just eating less overall, reported significantly lower hunger and also less fatigue compared to the IF groups.
Wow, really? Less hunger with standard calorie cutting. That kind of goes against the idea that fasting periods help control hunger better.
It does. It suggests that for some people, the fasting periods in IF might actually be more challenging, more uncomfortable than just consistently eating a bit less. Dropout rates, though, were similar between the groups overall.
That hunger finding is a really key practical point. Okay, what about metabolic health markers? Blood sugar, insulin, cholesterol.
In the short term, not much difference. No significant changes in blood glucose or insulin between the groups.
Okay.
Long term, though, the IF group did show significant reductions in fasting insulin and OMA-IR, which measures insulin resistance. That sounds good, right?
Yeah, improved insulin sensitivity is generally a good thing.
But, and this is a significant, but triglycerides, a type of blood fat, were actually significantly lower in the CR group in the long term.
Huh. So mixed results there. Better insulin for IF, better triglycerides for CR.
Kind of. And it led the researchers to suggest that the improvements in glucose and insulin seen with IF might be more related to the weight loss achieved rather than the fasting pattern itself.
The weight loss is the main driver again.
Exactly. They basically said IF is an alternative if you struggle with regular CR, but it's not proving superior for, say, blood sugar control when calories are equal.
Makes sense. And inflammation. There's often talk about IF reducing inflammation.
They did see a drop in one marker, IL-6, in the IF group short term. But overall, the research picture suggests IF has minimal or maybe no direct effect on inflammation markers beyond what you'd expect from losing weight. Lose weight, inflammation tends to go down regardless of how you lost it.
It really keeps coming back to the weight loss, doesn't it? Now, you mentioned biases earlier. This seems really important when trying to interpret these results.
Absolutely critical. The Hamsho review pointed out that none of the 20 studies they included were rated as having a low risk of bias. Many were moderate or even high risk.
So we need to take the findings with a grain of salt. What kind of biases are we talking about?
Two main ones pop up frequently in diet research: expectation bias and selection bias.
Expectation bias.
Yeah.
That's where people's beliefs influence the outcome. Like the placebo effect, but for diets.
Precisely. If you believe strongly that IF is going to work miracles, perhaps because of things you've seen online or heard from friends, you might unconsciously change your behavior.
Like trying a bit harder, maybe extending the fast longer than planned, or eating slightly less even if you're told not to.
Exactly that. The opinion piece accompanying the Hamsho review mentioned a specific study by Liu et al., which we'll get to next. In that study, even though both groups were instructed to eat the same reduced calories, the IF group self-reported eating about 138 fewer calories per day.
Wow.
And they also extended their fasting window by an average of 2.5 hours longer than they were supposed to. So their belief or enthusiasm might have led them to be better participants than prescribed, skewing the results towards IF.
That's fascinating and a bit concerning for research. So the perceived magic might just be subconscious extra effort. What about selection bias?
Selection bias is about who joins the study in the first place. If people who already love fasting or are highly motivated and have had success before are more likely to sign up for an IF study.
Then the results might look better than they would for the average person trying it for the first time?
Exactly. You get a self-selected group of enthusiasts. Also, issues with how participants are randomized, something called allocation concealment. If that's not done properly, it can seriously inflate the apparent benefits of one treatment over another. These biases don't mean the research is useless, but they do mean we have to be cautious, especially when effects are small.
It definitely adds layers of complexity. Okay, let's move to that Liu et al. Study you mentioned, a 12-month trial, head-to-head comparison.
Yes, Liu et al., 2022. A big randomized trial in China, 139 patients with obesity. They compared time-restricted eating combined with calorie restriction versus just daily calorie restriction alone. Importantly, both groups were prescribed the same target calorie intake, aiming for that isocaloric comparison over a full year.
A whole year, same prescribed calories. What happened?
Well, both groups lost weight, which is good. The TRE group lost an average of 8.0 kilograms, about 17.6 pounds. The daily CR group lost 6.3 kilograms, about 13.9 pounds.
So the TRE group lost a little bit more.
A little bit, yes, about 1.8 kilograms more on average, and this is the key statistical point, that difference was not statistically significant.
Meaning it could have just been down to chance.
Exactly. The p-value was 0.11, well above the typical 0.05 threshold for significance. And beyond weight, there were no significant differences in waist circumference, BMI, body fat percentage, lean mass, blood pressure, or other metabolic risk factors between the groups after 12 months. Adherence was also high in both groups.
So this large, year-long, well-controlled study essentially found no meaningful difference between IF plus calorie restriction and just calorie restriction alone when the calorie goal was the same.
That's the conclusion, yes. It strongly reinforces the idea that the calorie restriction itself is the primary driver of the benefits.
Okay, let's look at another angle. The Lowe et al. Study from 2020, the TREAT trial. This one had a slightly different design, right?
Yes, this was a 12-week trial focusing on 168 TRE. But here, the TR group was allowed to eat ad libitum within their 8-hour window.
Ad libitum meaning eat as much as they wanted. They weren't given a strict calorie target.
Correct. They could eat freely during their 8-hour window. This was compared to a control group eating 3 structured meals throughout the day, also presumably ad libitum.
Interesting. So did giving people just the time window without a calorie goal lead to weight loss compared to regular eating?
The TRE group did lose a small amount of weight, about 0.94 kilograms on average over 12 weeks. But the control group also had a slight change. The difference in weight loss between the two groups was tiny, only minus 0.26 kilograms, and not statistically significant.
So even without being told to restrict calories, just eating in an 8-hour window wasn't automatically better for weight loss than eating normally.
According to the study, no, their conclusion was pretty clear. Time-restricted eating, in the absence of other interventions, is not more effective in weight loss than eating throughout the day.
But there was another important finding in this study, wasn't there? Something about body composition.
Yes, and this is a really crucial point. The TREAT trial found a significant decrease in lean mass, that's muscle, in the TRE group compared to the control group. They lost more muscle.
Oof. That's not what you want when you're trying to lose weight. You want to lose fat, preserve muscle.
Exactly. It really highlights that if you are using TRE, you need to pay close attention to getting enough protein within your eating window to help mitigate that muscle loss. It's a potential downside if not managed carefully.
A very important consideration. Okay, one more key study. Maruthur et al., 2024. You said this one has a particularly strong design for our question.
Yes, this one really hits the nail on the head regarding the isocaloric comparison. It was a randomized isocaloric feeding study. This means the researchers provided the food and strictly controlled and matched the calorie intake between the groups for the entire 12 weeks.
So no relying on self-reporting or hoping people stick to the calorie goal. They actually control the food intake precisely.
Exactly. 41 participants with obesity and pre-diabetes or diet-controlled diabetes. They were assigned to either a 10-hour TRE window, eating most calories before 1 p.m. an early TRE pattern, or a usual eating pattern, UEP, over 16 hours, eating most calories after 5 p.m., a later pattern. But critically, both groups ate the exact same number of calories.
So perfectly matched calories, just different timing, early versus late eating windows. What did they find?
Both groups lost weight. The early TRE group lost 2.3 kilograms. The later UEP group lost 2.6 kilograms. The difference, not statistically significant.
Wow. Even with the strictly controlled calories, the timing made no difference to weight loss.
None whatsoever. And they also found no differences in glucose control, waist circumference, blood pressure, or lipid levels between the groups.
That seems like incredibly clear evidence.
It really is. And their conclusion sums it up perfectly. They stated, "In the setting of isocaloric eating, TRE did not decrease weight or improve glucose homeostasis relative to a UEP, suggesting that any effects of TRE on weight in prior studies may be due to reductions in caloric intake.
Well, it couldn't be much clearer. It points directly back to the calories.
Yeah.
The timing, whether early or late, didn't add a unique benefit when calories were locked down.
Precisely. It strongly suggests the reason IF often works for weight loss in the real world is simply because confining eating to a window often leads people to consume fewer calories overall, whether they realize it or not.
Okay, Dr. May, let's try to synthesize all of this. We've looked at a big meta-analysis, long-term trials, ad libitum studies, and this really strict isocaloric feeding study. What's the big picture message for people listening?
I think the big picture is remarkably consistent across these high-quality studies, Dr. Kai. When you carefully control for total calorie intake, making sure both IF and CR groups eat the same amount.
Intermittent fasting doesn't really show superior benefits.
Exactly. It doesn't consistently outperform traditional caloric restriction for weight loss or for most of the key cardiometabolic health markers like blood sugar, cholesterol, or blood pressure.
So that special effect or metabolic advantage people sometimes talk about with IF, it might not actually be from the fasting period itself.
It seems more likely that the main benefit often comes from the fact that IF can be a practical tool that helps people unintentionally or intentionally reduce their overall calorie intake.
By limiting the time you can eat, maybe?
That's probably a big part of it, yeah. Fewer hours available means potentially fewer meals, fewer snacks, or maybe it's that expectation bias we talked about, people trying harder because they believe in it. Either way, the end result is often fewer calories consumed.
So IF isn't necessarily magic, but it could be a useful strategy for calorie reduction for some people.
Absolutely. It's about finding what works for the individual. If the structure of time-restricted eating helps you manage your hunger better, or simplifies your eating patterns in a way that leads you to eat less overall without feeling overly deprived, then it can be a perfectly valid and effective approach.
Adherence is key, right? The best diet is the one you can actually stick to long term.
Couldn't agree more. If Ely helps someone adhere to a calorie deficit more easily than traditional CR, then great. But it's not because the timing itself has unique magical properties beyond the calorie reduction it facilitates.
We also need to remember that potential pitfall from the low study, right? The muscle loss.
Yes, that's a critical takeaway. If you choose IF, especially something like TRE, paying attention to getting adequate protein during your eating window is really important to help preserve lean body mass while you're losing fat. Don't sacrifice muscle.
And finally, keep a critical eye on the hype versus the science. Be aware of how much belief and expectation can play a role.
Absolutely. Look for well-controlled studies, especially those comparing isocaloric intakes when evaluating claims about different diets.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the core message seems clear. When it comes to weight loss and many related health benefits, creating a sustainable calorie deficit is still the fundamental principle.
That's a foundation, yes.
Intermittent fasting can be one effective tool or strategy to help achieve that calorie deficit for some individuals.
But it doesn't appear inherently superior to other methods of caloric restriction when the total calorie intake is truly the same.
So maybe the question people should ask isn't, is intermittent fasting better?
Perhaps a more powerful question is, which approach to achieving a sensible calorie reduction is most sustainable for me personally over the long haul? And how can I make sure that approach supports not just fat loss, but also helps me keep my muscle mass and overall health?
That's a great thought to leave our listeners with. Find the sustainable path for you. Thank you for joining us on What the Study Says.
It was a pleasure, Dr. Kai.
If you found this deep dive helpful, please do subscribe and share our channel. Help us get these evidence-based insights out to more people.
And we look forward to exploring more fascinating research with you all next time.